We're live for our second constitutional conversation. I'll wait for some folks to join us and then we'll get into things. Today we are talking about the separation of money and politics. But let's wait for some folks to join and then we'll get started. Obviously a very big topic, an important topic, given the nature of our government right now. Let's see here. All right. So we are live on all platforms. Let's see here. Any questions coming in? So we're talking again about the separation of money and politics today. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I'd be happy to respond to any of them. For starters, we are proposing a really interesting way of going about campaign finance reform and the separation of money and politics. Unlike a lot of other proposals, rather than sort of purely targeting corporations and money, what we're doing is we're actually looking for higher order principles. We're looking for ways of bolstering democracy rather than antagonizing money, antagonizing corporations. And in the process of bolstering democracy, what ends up happening is money ends up falling by the wayside. And so our proposal is quite unique. I mean, firstly, the obvious, which is overturning Citizens United with a new with a new constitutional amendment that empowers and gives Congress the right to regulate campaign finance. That would clarify that the First Amendment, although it does protect freedom of speech, freedom of the press, that it doesn't only doesn't rule out the possibility of regulating campaign finance, that campaign finance, speaking with your money, is not necessarily a permitted form of free speech. In addition, the big sort of centerpiece of our proposal is the idea that if you don't live in a district, why are you donating or contributing to a candidate within that district? I think many of us have done that, and I think that's understandable because of the nature of politics and how it's become national. And if the other side is doing it, then we have to do it to counterbalance that. But it's not really a healthy way to go about politics. This is why there's so much money in politics, because everybody's contributing to everybody across the country. But ultimately, these representatives are really supposed to represent the people, the constituents in their district. And so why can I donate to a candidate in Georgia when I live in California, right? Why can someone in Texas donate to a candidate in New York? So this is the second piece and the centerpiece of the proposal. And then the third piece of the proposal, separating money from politics, is really about lobbying and closing the revolving door and ensuring that that political officials cannot use their office for personal gain. So they can't use their office for a nudge, nudge, wink, wink of, hey, I'll get this law passed. And then, by the way, when I'm not in office, you'll hire me and pay me $1 million a year. That needs to end. If any of you have read or seen any documentaries about the opioid crisis, this is actually part of how it happened. An official at the FDA passed a label to put on OxyContin that said it was not as addictive as other painkillers. And how did they get that passed? Well, the FDA official was offered right after he passed that label and made that legal. That permitted them to sort of get to the market and pass through all of the doctors and the medical communities to be legitimized. He was immediately offered a job, a high-paying job at the company, and left the FDA soon after. So for a long story short, we're getting money out of politics in a few different ways. One is by giving Congress, again, the power to regulate campaign finance. Two is by putting representation on a pedestal and saying that you can't donate to candidates that you're not qualified to vote for. And by the way, that implicates corporations as well, because corporations can't vote. And so therefore, by extension, corporations will no longer be able to contribute to elections because they are not voters in elections. And three is closing the revolving door and ending the power of special interests and lobbyists in government by making sure they can't use it for personal gain. So we have some questions coming in. Hello, the human rights efforts. The human rights effort is doing a great thing. They're working to actually get the mechanisms in place to call for a constitutional convention where this kind of amendment could be passed. And we look forward to partnering with them so that we can work together on both getting the convention to happen, and then that way we can propose our amendments there and have a forum to do so. We do have a question from Leonard Stevenson, and it's a bit lengthy, so I'll read it out loud for people who aren't specifically in the chat on Facebook. I'm trying to display it on the screen, but it's a bit long, so it's not going to make it. So I'll read it out loud. Leonard says, overall, we definitely need ways of reducing corruption. The general approach of this amendment is sound. It takes into account the key issues and sources of corruption and unambiguously gives Congress power to deal with them. While I understand the need to use generalized higher-level language in an amendment and the need to allow flexibility outside the amendment process, I'm not sure that this is enough. For example, with regard to Section 2, Clause 3, which for folks not present in the document, there is a need to allow certain votes to be taken in secret, such as impeachment. But I think that simply allowing Congress to decide which procedures should be taken in secret would be subject to a great deal of abuse. I think before I read the rest of this comment, because it's quite lengthy, I'll say to Leonard, that piece of the proposal, I don't really consider that to be a part of our separation of money and politics. That's a separate piece that we are considering and we will have a future conversation about, which is really about balancing autonomy and accountability. Congress, of course, needs to be accountable to the people, and there needs to be transparency about the way members vote in order to make sure that they can be voted out if the people are unhappy with the way they're representing them. That said, in some cases, the people don't have the full transparency into what is being voted on and can rush the judgment, especially if the media is covering that legislation in a biased way or omitting and only showing part of what is happening. And so in some cases, in complex procedures where it can be manipulated by the media or by special interests, we give Congress the ability to have secret ballots so that so that no specific representative can be called out for torpedoing a piece of legislation, or the most specific instance that we have is in impeachment. We all saw with the impeachment of Donald Trump, the two impeachments of Donald Trump, although we know that many of the Republicans really did want to impeach Donald Trump and did want to remove him, they could not do so because of the concerns about the retaliation of their voters. And that's primarily because of the media outlets that those voters were paying attention to. And so really, ultimately, those congressmen were at the whims of those biased media outlets. They were being controlled by what the media outlets wanted them to do, which was an unhealthy, I think, way to proceed because they couldn't vote their conscience, especially in something so important like an impeachment, where there is an opportunity for someone very persuasive and very manipulative to manipulate the process, whether it's the president or a special interest. Thank you so much, Leonard, for that question. Let me just check if there's any other questions on our other platforms. Thank you, the Human Rights Effort. We are excited about this, as you say, as an important piece of history. And I know this is one of our early conversations. This is only our second one. But the way we see this is a modern day Federalist Papers. And the Federalist Papers back in the late 1700s, when we were working on passing the original Constitution, was a way to really get the people to understand what they were buying into, what social contract they were going to sign. that's what we're trying to do here. Is we're not saying that we, the writers of the Reconstitution, are representative of the people. We're not. But this stage of our process is to share it with the people, to get feedback from the people, hear the voices, integrate that feedback in a healthy way, in a constructive way, and simultaneously get buy-in and credibility and legitimacy for what we're pitching, because it's hearing and integrating those voices. And we're spreading understanding of why we're doing what we're doing in detail, and all of the downstream implications for various policies and procedures and people and interests and all of that. So we're really excited about this process. Again, we're very early, so we don't have as many viewers, perhaps, as we will in months from now, but we all have to start somewhere, of course, right? So across multiple platforms, we probably have about a dozen people online right now. So we're really glad to have you with us, and we hope that that grows in orders of magnitude as the weeks progress. And we'll circle back to these conversations again once we do our first round and have a broader movement to speak with, so that everyone has a chance to be heard on all of the issues. Any other questions? Let's see. Let's see here. Okay, I guess it looks like Leonard had more on his question, so let me just read that out for everyone. But I think that simply allowing Congress to decide which procedures should be taken in secret would be subject to a great deal of abuse. While autonomy is necessary to the preservation of a better country in some scenarios, like those listed in footnote 7, for those of you who are deep in the Reconstitution, you can look up footnote 7. Actually, I can do that for you and read that aloud, which is, let's see here. For example, Congress may determine as necessary when members may not vote their conscience due to fear of violent or punitive retaliation. Leonard suggests to add a carefully crafted list of when autonomy is allowed to be used. Even this is subject to abuse, but the abuse would be more limited. As an analogy, the original Constitution simply allowed states to decide election districts and procedures. Now, gerrymandering is a huge problem that you're attempting to address. How do we prevent similar problems with this document? That's a great question. And Leonard, that's actually why we have such extensive footnotes in this document. The original Constitution does not have footnotes. People often treat, I would say, some of the documented records, the transcriptions of the conversations that went on between the founders as evidence of legislative intent, as evidence of what they were trying to accomplish. The Federalist Papers themselves are often used as a source of that. We are using the footnotes in our document to capture some of those things. And so I agree, it would actually be great to get a carefully crafted list of when autonomy is allowed to be used. In other words, when a secret ballot would be permitted. We certainly invite you, Leonard. That would be a great thing. We are, there's only so many of us, so we want you to get involved. If you would like to send us that carefully crafted list, we'll take a look and try to add it into the footnotes. We really appreciate the depth into which you've read our document and which you've been involved, and please do send along that list, and we'd be happy to take a look and even add it into our footnote here. And I'll also say these recorded conversations will be part of the record, the historical record of the conversations, to potentially infer the intent of the people. Thank you, Leonard. Yes, I would love that. This is the type of feedback we want, really constructive, substantive feedback that we can integrate into the document, because although we spent 2 years on this, there were certain points at which we knew we had to move on to new subjects, because there's only so many nitty-gritty details. The devil is always in the details that we were able to address without getting hung up for decades on each of these big questions we were asking. So I really appreciate your help with that. Let's see. Do we have anyone else? Looks like nothing currently on Twitter. We are on a Twitter space, which is a great place to join if you do want to actually have your voice literally heard. I can invite you on stage and you can speak up and have other people hear you. If not, please feel free to post in the comments. It looks like we have some more people joining us on TikTok. So TikTok, feel free to please post your questions in the chat. Hello, JP Mull. And if anyone else on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram also have comments, please post them and I'd be happy to field them. For those of you who have joined since we kicked off, again, this is a discussion about the separation of money and politics, really probably the fundamental question and concern of our times. Of course, there are many others, but nothing else can really get done without addressing this one first. And so that's why we chose it as our first piece to discuss together. Our proposal, again, has really three pieces to it. One is providing Congress with the ability to regulate campaign finance reform, to overturn Citizens United, making that very clear that that is a power of Congress. In addition, ensuring that the only people that can vote in a district are the only people that can contribute to a campaign in a district are the people that can vote in that district. And so that by nature excludes corporations because corporations cannot vote. It also excludes all of the money flowing in from outside of the district, which significantly reduces the amount of influence on politics. I think a critical example would be just imagine a billionaire living somewhere in Silicon Valley. They can't donate to every single candidate in every single race across the country. And that's what they do right now. They donate to competing candidates because when that way, whoever gets into office, they have supported and therefore owe them a favor. And so it's actually atrocious. And it's something we need to stop. And that would be a huge way to stop it, right? If you can't donate to a candidate in a district other than your own, how are you going to influence them? You can't vote for them. You can't donate to them. So I think that's the centerpiece. It's really innovative. It's something that I have not heard proposed before, and it's the centerpiece of our proposal here. And then, of course, the third piece is once candidates are in office, limiting the ability to lobby them, limiting the revolving door of lobbyists becoming staffers, and limiting vice versa the ability of officials to join companies after they've left in a sort of nudge nudge wink wink manner, a quid pro quo as they say, to do their bidding and then get the payoff later. So all three of those things we feel really confident would not just limit the influence of money in politics, but separate money from politics. And we are open to further proposals and ideas of ways to do this. Many people talk about democracy dollars. That is certainly a very interesting proposal. Many people are on board with that. We did discuss that. There are certain downsides to that. It's of course an expense for the government from taxpayers. Taxpayers are then funding elections. And B, we think ultimately there will be too many ways around that. Candidates that self-fund and things like that, there's going to be too many loopholes and bureaucracy, in our opinion, for that to be efficient, for that to be effective. And we think that what we're proposing as a higher order principle of just saying, if you can't vote for this candidate, you can't donate. It's so simple, it works. And so we would love to hear more feedback on that. Thank you, Neurospark, for your likes. We see you, and we're really happy to have you here. Please send any thoughts or comments or suggestions in the chat. We'd love to hear them. So yeah, and really, I'll say, and this is, I'll also say and share on a personal note, before I worked on the Reconstitution, and currently, before I currently work in education technology. Years ago, I actually went to law school, and while in law school and briefly afterwards, I was in Washington, D.C., and I did work as a lobbyist. I was not happy doing so because I don't like representing special interests, but that was sort of the path by which you pay off your student debt. So I've seen this firsthand, and it's really, really atrocious. And don't get me wrong, lobbyists do have a valuable role in our political ecosystem. It's just the magnitude of influence that they have that's unacceptable. And let me just say something about that, because I know a lot of people hear the word lobbyist and think 100% evil. And I agree, because of the way the system is set up, their current way of contributing tends to be negative and deceitful and things like that. But they do offer a certain level of expertise, industry expertise, on issues that other people may not have. And so they can often detect unintended consequences of legislation on their industry that would actually hurt them, hurt the economy, hurt their employees, hurt the markets more generally. And so they're good canaries in the coal mine to make those warnings and make those cases. The problem, again, is the amount of influence they have relative to voters and to everyday citizens. I can say, they also will try to persuade politicians to vote for legislation by, of course, lobbying. But what does lobbying mean? They'll present them with a bunch of documents and research, oh, look at who this economist said this about this issue. Oftentimes they will absolutely pay an academic, a PhD economist, to write a paper for them. This is not illegal. And sort of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, that paper will have conclusions that are favorable to the outcome they want to see, right? That's the type of thing that we want to get out of politics, and we can get out of politics if we reduce the amount of money in politics. Yes, another interesting piece of the way money is in politics from the lobbying perspective. And just, of course, a little side bit about my background and how I am aware of some of these issues on a firsthand basis. Any other questions from folks? Let me check our various feeds here. Hello, Rusty Hall. Thanks for joining us. Hello, John. Thanks for joining us. If you do want to speak, please raise your hand or type anything into the chat, and I'm happy to field it. Yeah, and the other thing I'm going to say about the centerpiece of our proposal, I'm going to go back to that, the piece where we say you can only donate to a candidate if you are eligible to vote for the candidate. This was one of the first pieces of what we call political innovation that we came up with for the Reconstitution. And it's really emblematic of the overall approach we're taking to the Reconstitution, which is what we call integrative, depending on how you use the word. Because what it's doing is it's not looking to find a particular outcome. It doesn't have a political, it's trying to avoid having a political bent, a political bias for a specific political ideology, let's put it that way. What it's trying to do is find those principles, those values that we all share as Americans, right? And in this case, what we're talking about is democracy. And yes, some people would say, well, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. I would take sort of some issue with that because I believe and know that a constitutional republic is a kind of democracy. But we can all agree that representation is an important piece of our government, and we like being represented, and we don't want to lose that. And so reinforcing that, bolstering that, and saying, well, if I'm being represented by these particular people, by these particular officials, then I should be the one who chooses that they are going to represent me. That's what voting is about. So then why would we not apply the same principle to campaign contributions, to campaign finance? So that's the type of approach we're taking with all of our solutions in the Reconstitution, is finding these higher order principles, finding these values and ideals that we all agree on, and not trying to have some sort of secret agenda of something we're trying to pass. We're just trying to bolster the values we already agree on. Let me see here. I'm getting some questions on TikTok. One person said, no, politics and money is good. Why do you think China was so successful? The difference is that the US is politically involved in a regarded way. I would like to hear more details on that, NPC. I'm not sure what you mean about why China is so successful. China is not a democracy. It's an authoritarian regime. And so politics and money doesn't really apply, at least in the way I'm thinking about it there. And I'm not sure what you mean by politically involved in a regarded way, but happy to field questions if you can elaborate. It looks like we have another question from Leonard. Thanks for taking my long questions. Of course, Leonard, we really appreciate how in-depth you've read our document and how in-depth your questions are, and the feedback that you're sending is amazing feedback that we do plan to integrate. So Leonard's asking, and this is getting a little bit away from money and politics, but I'll field it anyway because it is in our first proposed amendment of the Reconstitution, the proposed 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. He doesn't understand the purpose of Section 4, Clause 2, which basically repeals what's called the Non-Delegation Doctrine, even if it is only to independent executive branch agencies. So the Non-Delegation Doctrine, for folks who don't know about it, is basically that Congress cannot give away its powers to other branches of government to retain the checks and balances of government. So it can't say, okay, EPA, you can write laws, but there is sort of this fine balance of rulemaking powers that they have to write regulations within the constraints of what Congress gives them. So Congress sort of gives them a framing, and then these executive agencies can help execute and administer those laws by writing rules and enforcing those rules. So what we're doing here is we're saying, well, let Congress be a little bit more broad about that. Tell them, we can give the EPA more broad authority to say your job is to protect the environment, do it, rather than do it in X, Y, Z ways, and then you work out the nittier, grittier details. What we're saying is a level of sort of granularity here and giving a little bit more flexibility and autonomy to these agencies. And yes, Leonard, I think what you're saying, is this a way of getting around congressional gridlock? Absolutely. That's the bent here. And by the way, not just congressional gridlock. In the end of the day, it helps move some of that rulemaking power away from the political arena in Congress, where there is influence by lobbyists and special interests, into the hands of less biased. I know there's not such thing as non-biased, but less biased experts who are hired specifically because of their expertise into these various executive departments, whether it's the EPA, whether it's the Department of Energy, whether it's the Department of Treasury, etc. Leonard, without heavy qualification, however, couldn't it simply be used by whoever is in control of Congress to pass off whatever they can't agree on to their preferred bureaucrat who gets to then unilaterally decide? This sort of thing is already a major problem in Congress insofar as Congress gets nothing done and the executive keeps expanding the use of executive authority. I feel that as written, this could be used as a loophole to continue to undermine the purpose of Congress and exacerbate the current problem. Great point. It's definitely something we're trying to balance. And if you have suggestions of ways we can write footnotes to help close that loophole or make sure that loophole does not grow, we're open to it. But we do think that as the world becomes more interdependent, there is a reason the executive branch is growing, and we have to be careful about this, of course. But the executive branch has grown because, just like during the FDR administration and the New Deal, the reason it needed to grow is because times are changing and there needs to be quicker decisions made. Again, as you mentioned, congressional gridlock is a problem, and there needs to be more expertise in making those decisions. So yes, I think it's still a careful balance, but I think for purposes of where we are now, that balance is not quite right. I think the executive authority in other areas may be more problematic, such as military use, which also needs to be quick, but it needs to be checked and balanced properly by Congress. That's where the Patriot Act is, but we can discuss that another day. But definitely open, Leonard, to hearing more feedback specifically on how you would word a limitation to mitigate some of the downstream impacts that you're thinking about. It looks like NPC has some clarifications about his China comment. And hello, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us. Nurse 20 years here. Aaron, thank you so much for what you do. It's such an important career. And we do have a constitutional amendment that really looks to value properly a career like yours, which is currently undervalued. We do not have a match in this society between the social value that people add to society. It's not aligned with the economic value that those people are compensated with. So we do have an amendment for that. It's Amendment 5, and we'll be coming back to that. And if you have any questions, Aaron, I'd be happy to field them. NPC said, because we already live in socialism for the rich, in China, they can manipulate economics, and it's very effective. I'm not I understand what you're saying, but I'm not understanding your point or your question, NPC. Oh, here we go. When the state mixes free markets with the people's political and social needs, it's incredibly good because the production becomes for and by the people instead of the bureaucracy of the USSR and the USA. So I'm trying to understand better your question, NPC. Do you have a question about this? When the state mixes free markets with the people's political and social needs, it's incredibly good. I would actually definitely agree with that. And so we're not, maybe that's where the misunderstanding is. What we're talking about in separation of money and politics is not separating the impact of politics on how people make money, or on the economic welfare of people. But we're specifically saying the influence of money on politics. So it's sort of the other way around. Hopefully that helps clarify. And if you have further questions, happy to answer. Thank you so much, A Nova, for all these gifts that you're sending me on TikTok. Not quite sure what they do yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Hello, Sam Skalbeck. Looks like we have some people on our Twitter spaces as well. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and I'm happy to bring you on stage. The human rights effort, no problem, NPC. I totally understand it was a title, separation of money and politics, but no, that's not what we want. Is 100% free markets. Well, we have a belief that free markets are always somewhat regulated. It's a matter of the boundaries, but we can discuss that in more detail in another conversation. The human rights effort says, yes, I was thinking of that as a loophole, clause 1, but I agree that we have to find the balance and restore faith and integrity in the system to get there. No suggestions quite yet, though. Thank you, the human rights effort. Thank you, Daisha, if that's you over there. I'd love to discuss this in deep depth with you one-on-one at some point, because I know we're going to partner together on this and we can really dig in. Chris asks, how are you connected to the Forward Party concept? Great question, Chris. So I actually joined the Forward Party's Twitter space last week. What they're doing is incredible. It's really important because they're laser focused on ranked choice voting, as I'd say their top item on their agenda, which is also a top item on our agenda. And the reason for that is, and it's not quite as high for us as money in politics, because I don't think we can get ranked choice voting until we get money out of politics. They sort of all have to happen relatively simultaneously, but there is some order of operations here. But the Forward Party is doing great work because it's what we like to call declaring political independence. Let's see here. And what we mean by political independence is independence from this two-party system, this two-party duopoly over politics. Ranked choice voting, and we'll discuss this in more depth at another call when we have that as our topic, really opens up the possibility of having third parties and independent candidates win, because it eliminates the sort of wasted vote concept where you don't want to vote for a third party or independent candidate because you don't want to waste your vote. You're too concerned about this battle between Democrats and Republicans. Ranked choice voting, you can vote for who you want and then have a fallback vote if that person doesn't qualify to go to one of those other candidates. We are not yet connected directly with the Forward Party. I'm reaching out to them, but we're still early in our movement. I do think that it will be a great partnership when we do get there. And our real goal is to be a transpartisan movement. So we would love for the Forward Party to adopt the Reconstitution as part of its platform. And similarly, we'd like to do the same with other third parties and Democrats and Republicans, individual candidates, or parties as a whole. We are transpartisan. So we'd love to do that. If you know anyone at the Forward Party, I'd love to connect with them and discuss in more detail. And yes, I agree. What we're doing fits with the Forward Party. I appreciate your kind words. America needs this. We agree. And Chris, thank you for joining the conversation. Please feel free to reach out to us directly on any of the social media platforms. We are monitoring all our messages. And if you want to discuss in more details, anything substantively, logistically, partnerships, etc., we're open to it. So really, thank you for your attendance here. Let's see here. Do we have anything on our... we have a couple of folks on Twitter Spaces. If you want to join the conversation, please raise your hand and I can bring you on stage. We have, it looks like, maybe another question on TikTok. Great question, NPC. Yes, that was a great question. Thank you, NBC. Let's see here. Does anyone on Twitter? Nope. Hi, Chris on Twitter. Thanks for joining us. Let me know if you have any questions. You can either tweet at us or raise your hand and I should be able to bring you on stage. Let's see. I will invite you to speak in case you're interested, and then you can either decline or accept. Thank you. Anyone else have questions coming in? Wow, we're already 35 minutes in. We are currently scheduled to do these for an hour every Thursday, but we will decide based on sort of attendance and interest on how long these conversations go, sort of as we go. But again, I know I'm looking at TikTok. We have people that are joining fresh, so thank you for joining us. Again, we are talking about the separation of money and politics, our centerpiece, which is about ensuring that people who can't vote for a candidate, can't donate to that candidate, getting money out of politics. User 09 something something talking about free markets in a way that's sort of negative, and we agree that that free markets aren't perfect, but we believe we can integrate them into our solution. Mubarak, will Trump make it to the White House again? I think only time will tell. I don't think that's something we can answer. What we are doing as a movement is trying to stay out of the weeds of Trump, about all of these wedge issues. Trump is a wedge issue. All of the current events that are making people crazy. What we're trying to do is look past that, look into the future, 10 years from now. And I think by doing so, we will get out of this sort of gridlock of polarization, stop sort of fighting every battle tooth and nail, and move towards a place where we're designing a future. And so we're not really focused on Trump. We definitely believe that Trump is not a healthy contributor to our politics because of his tone and because of his interest in authoritarian politics and control, and also in sort of spreading misinformation, in our opinion. He's able to do that because of his experience in reality TV, in the media. But he will, if he gets in, he gets in. And I think it will be that much more momentum for a backlash to eventually have a more substantial transformative moment where we could have a reconstitution. Now, do I want to go through that in order to have a reconstitution? Not particularly. But history has a way of working itself out, and we will see. But we are laser focused on the future and making sure there is a platform available for when the moment arises that the people really demand this kind of transformative change. Let's see here. Anova, if I wanted to donate to this, could I? Yes. We have not opened it up yet, but we are launching our Patreon within the next week or so, where we will accept donations. Unfortunately, we're not yet a 501c3, so it won't be a tax write-off, but we do appreciate your interest in donating. Our donations will also come with, we are working on putting out merchandise, and not sort of cheesy merchandise, but really merchandise that you can use to spread the word, both with our logo, but also we are working on some really interesting things, visual media that helps to us represent some of the concepts we're working on. We are using DALL-E, which is a really interesting tool for those of you interested in AI, that generates images based on your description, and we're sort of describing some abstract concepts about what we see justice in the future as, and generating art like that. So there'll be an opportunity to purchase art to hang on your wall, or to put on a shirt, or to put on a mug that represents the Reconstitution without being too franchise and branding oriented, but would just be a nice thing to have in exchange for your support. And then there will also be things with our brand so that you can share that with others and help spread the word. So thank you, Anova. Please look out for that. I will post a video on it as soon as we have it live. Any other questions? Let's see here. We have a bunch of folks on TikTok. Chris, Leonard, Human Rights Effort. Let me know if you got anything. Chris, John, if you have anything, please let me know, and I'm happy to invite you on stage. So yeah, that's this is our first big proposal. And there's more to come, and we'll get more and more people participating. It's already a lot to manage 12 people, so I can't wait to have more, and to get folks to help me moderate these and filter through the questions that are coming in. Leonard, it looks like, has another thought. So I'll read that because Leonard is the person speaking, but thank you, Mag K. I hope I'm going to pronounce it correctly. Thanks for joining us. So Leonard says, Article 1A on money and politics is well crafted to deal with the current situation. Minimalistic. I like that word. That is the word we're going for. I think simple is elegant and simple is less controversial and opens up less opportunity for conflict and polarization. He has no feedback on it at this point. We appreciate that. Same for Article 1C on the judicial system. That will be coming later in our talks when we turn back to Amendment 1 to talk about all of Amendment 1, not just money and politics, but there are other aspects of what we think are entrenched power and influence in politics that we want to get rid of. And one of those things is life terms for Supreme Court justices. An individual person, no matter how brilliant they are as a Supreme Court justice, should not have the longevity of influence over the political outcomes on the country. That's something we address in Article 1C by creating a system where they have actually 18-year terms, because we do think long terms are important for Supreme Court justices to be independent, but we also believe that it should have some limitations. And the way we're doing that is not by removing them from office, but actually rotating them out of office into the federal appeals courts and rotating in other federal appeals judges to make sure that we're still operating from the same pool of people, but that we get some diversity of opinion and thought within the Supreme Court. So thank you so much, Leonard, for acknowledging that and for your kind words on the work we've done. We do look forward to discussing that in more detail at a future date. Chris says, power/control. If only all sides would work together, there's plenty of energy, time, power to broadly benefit all Americans. Current system perfectly designed to give us what it does, reconstitute. Thank you. We are going to maybe take that line and put it somewhere on our website as a testimonial. We really appreciate it. This is not intended to be a political party. It's not intended to be even a political platform. This is a conversation. It is a modern day Federalist Papers. And what we're hoping is, right now we have a 30-page PDF, a document. But we will live in the world in the year 2022. This is the 21st century. And even a constitution, if we were to write a new constitution, if we were to update the constitution with new amendments, it should not take the form of purely written word. We have more ways of crafting and communicating our intent, our virtues, our agreements. And so we see this as a multimedia form of a constitution, of a reconstitution. And so by the end of this, we will have explainer videos. We will have these live conversations all as part of a package that is the reconstitution. So really the document is just the first step. This conversation, the explainer videos we're putting out, are going to all be part of the reconstitution itself, because in the year 2022, we do not just have to be words on a piece of paper. We have evolved past that from a technology standpoint, from a communication standpoint, to be able to communicate, to present, to express our ideas, our thoughts, our values in ways that are far richer and more accessible to broader audiences. Thank you, Anova. We will be doing that, and we appreciate your kind words. And I will definitely reach out to you about the donations and the contributions. Thank you, Bart. Yes, we definitely want to keep everything as direct and simple as possible. We believe that the devil is in the details, and that's where all of our disagreements lie. So finding these higher order principles, values that we can all agree on, and is really important to our process. And so we will, of course, have to take stands on very specific issues because we will be asked about them. But our stands may be a little bit more ambiguous than folks are used to, because we don't want to just appeal to people because we're trying to patronize, because we're trying to get people sold on something. We are trying to have a conversation, and we are trying to create a system of government in which conversations happen, right? That's where we are lost right now. We can't have conversations. Liberals can't have conversations with progressives. It's not just progressives and alt-right. We can't have conversations unless we agree 100%. And that agreement tends to sort of reinforce itself, right? We are spinning, echoing into these bubbles where we don't even know how we became a supporter of an issue. We just know that someone that we like supports that issue. And we're not thinking for ourselves anymore because we're constantly fed information from all these media sources. So we just need to put it all down, slow down, create a space, have a conversation. And we have a lot of different ways of doing that, not just through the Reconstitution as a forum, but what we would implement via the Reconstitution, and we'll be discussing this next week on Thursday at 8 p.m., is the form of deliberative democracy, which is probably the most concrete way of taking what we're doing with the Reconstitution and making that more official, more embedded within the actual process of government by allowing people to have conversations and having that influence the political process sometime in the future, and elevating issues that need to be discussed, finding solutions that need to be passed, and making people understand where each other are coming from better. Because right now, I think we live in a world where people jump to conclusions about each other, don't give each other the benefit of the doubt, and that impersonal sort of disconnect is partially a result of technology, and sort of not having that human touch and that direct personal connection, and it's highly problematic, and we're trying to change that. Um, let's see. Chris says, "Is it time for a constitutional convention?" Um, I think that's up to the people. I know the human rights effort is here, and the human rights effort is building towards that. We also believe that the time is coming. I don't know that the moment is this moment, because I think there is a lot of polarization. I don't think we have enough agreement of what we would actually want to do. So I think that's part of what we're doing here, is trying to get that agreement, trying to get that conversation going so that we can be in a place of national consensus. We're not going to get everyone to agree, but there are things that we can agree on, and finding those things is a prerequisite to calling a constitutional convention. Because if we went to a constitutional convention right now, it would be a figurative and maybe even literal gunfight. But we do think that the moment is coming, and there will be an inflection point. It may require we thought 2020 was rough. It may require another type of 2020 where things are really difficult. We don't want it to be that way, but that is how history tends to work itself out. Hopefully it's in a way that doesn't cause harm to people. We just believe that necessity is the mother of invention. And we started to inch towards that in 2020 with the election, with COVID, with the summer of civil unrest as a result of George Floyd's murder. And we were there, and now we have this brief moment to take a breath. Right, the pandemic is relatively subsided. We're not in an election season, or at least we're in a midterm election season. It's less front and center. Yes, there's a January 6th hearing ongoing, but it's nowhere near 2020. And so we're taking a deep breath right now. We know that this will not last forever. We have another vicious campaign coming up in 2024. We have another January 6th, 2025 coming up. These things will be difficult. And the way those pan out, whichever side sort of comes out on top on those things, we are still, unfortunately, a nation of two sides. And what we're trying to do in this conversation is create a many-sided country, a round country, a well-rounded country, where we can have better conversations around a round table. And we're trying to do that in parallel to the battles being fought, so that when those battles become so unbearable, people have somewhere to look. A conversation that's been going on, a movement of people who are working together, who have been talking and coming together because they're sick of having these fights about things they don't even care about, right? This is about finding what we actually care about, rather than fighting about what the media tells us to care about, what the politicians tell us to care about, what the companies and corporations tell us to care about, right? We all care about things, and yet it seems like those things never get talked about. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And so, yes, I think the constitutional convention moment is coming. I think there's just too much to do. The world is changing too fast to ignore that. But I do think a prerequisite is to have some sort of an ethos, an atmosphere of conversation. And that's what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to do that in sort of a way that mirrors what the Federalist Papers were. That's how the original Constitution got passed. It was a national conversation. And yes, it was on horseback, and it was on scrolls and quills. So it was not a bi-directional conversation. It was more of a broadcast by the framers out to the people. But in the year 2022, we have an opportunity to do more than that. And so we're having dialogues. We're having what I call multi-logs. I'm broadcasting across 5 different platforms right now, and fielding your questions and integrating your feedback into the documents. And I think that will be a powerful thing that will make people feel heard in an age where we're all trying to scream on top of each other and can't be heard, right? And we're going to need your help. So I appreciate folks who have said that they're looking for ways to contribute. I would love to and will be firing those platforms up, because what I will need, what we will need, some of my co-framers aren't here today, but we will need support, because there will be a lot of voices to hear, and we will need processes and people to help filter that information through, and integrate that information and synthesize that information for us to be constructive about putting it in our documents, putting it in the conversation, sharing it out, and making sure it's done in a way that's not sort of the traditional Facebook, Twitter sort of eco nightmare of just lots of shouting voices and toxicity and battles and bots. So we are going to need help. And if you're interested in helping, please do reach out to us directly. We're still able to field relatively quickly DMs and things like that. Looking for volunteers of all skill sets to join us and help out. And then soon we'll be accepting contributions so that we don't have to operate only on a volunteer basis, so that we can pay people, which we believe people should be paid to do good work. We have an amendment for that as well. But that is the approach we're taking, and we're really excited to get people on board, and we're really excited to see all of the support we're getting from folks like you, Chris, like folks from you, Bart, Leonard, the Human Rights Effort, A Nova here, Erin, and wow, I'm running out of, I can't even read all the names anymore. That's how many people we have. So it's really nice to have all of your support and your presence here. And you will see at the bottom of the screen, you won't see it on Twitter because it's a Twitter space. So we may shift back to Twitter live feeds starting next week rather than the space. But our values in these conversations are so critical. These are the values that we sought when we were looking for framers 2 years ago. Curiosity, humility, respectfulness, patience, resilience, and creativity. As long as we embody these things, we can have conversations. Without these things, we cannot. You have to be curious and be willing to have an open mind and listen to other people. Why are they saying what they're saying? Don't just have a knee-jerk reaction and say, I disagree with them, they're evil. I don't believe that people are naturally evil. They're coming from somewhere, and it may be a place of trauma, a place of hurt, a place of misunderstanding, but be interested. If you want to have a conversation with someone, don't jump to conclusions. Be curious about where they're coming from. Relatedly, be humble. Maybe you're wrong. We all have blind spots. We need to have some intellectual humility. There are things we know, there are things we don't know, and there are things we don't know we don't know. We need to accept that to have conversations and to be curious. Be respectful. It's the most obvious one, and we lack it, and we need to find it again. No name calling. No name calling. Expect it, you have to jump to the highest conclusion about people. We're all human beings, and yes, people can be mean, but hurt people. We need to start learning that, and it's not okay to return fire, to stoop to their level. And it may be cliche, but as Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. And I think that's a really important principle to live by. Be patient. It may take some time. You can't fit entire conversations into 160 characters. I'm sorry, Twitter. And I don't know how many characters it is now, but you understand my point. Sometimes it takes conversation, patience to listen and learn from each other. Be resilient. We need to stop being so triggered. I'm sorry, but we live in a world where where there's tons of people interacting. People may say things that trigger you, that offend you. Look for the possibility that that's not what they intended to say. Maybe words aren't matching, the words you're hearing aren't matching the words or the intents that they were trying to convey. Maybe they're really just trying to explore an issue and understand better and asking deep questions rather than jumping to the conclusion that they're being personal or offending you. And sometimes they might be, and in that case, they're violating the be respectful principle. But be resilient, and that's crucial to the last piece, which is be creative. We can't be creative if we're constantly operating from a place of filters and filtering our voices through political correctness, right? Yes, we should be respectful, we should be humble, we should be patient, all these things. But if we're going to be creative, we have to be willing to explore possible solutions that at first, that they may be terrible solutions, but we have to be willing to explore them and air them out and not be offended by them because we're exploring. We're not committing to them. We're not making them personal. So these are the principles that we want to bring to every single conversation. And we believe out of that, we will have more healing, more productive, more constructive conversations, more common sense solutions, and what we like to call political innovation. We do see this as a project that's a combination of political science and analysis along with creative arts. We want to paint a canvas of politics, and that's something that we haven't done in many, many centuries. Bart says, find the grain of truth, no matter how tiny, where you can, find the genuine and authentic agreement and build from that. Yes. Jump to the highest conclusion, assume good intentions. And it may not be the case, but that is where we have to all start operating from if we're ever going to make progress. Thank you, Chris, for this list of other desirable candidate qualities. We actually believe that these are qualities that are emergent, would naturally emerge from these other qualities, compassion and love for country and humanity and common sense. We think if you can embody these 6 principles we have on the screen that I just mentioned, those traits are secondary character traits that emerge naturally from this place, which we call political non-attachment, political independence, thinking for yourself rather than subscribing to politics as a form of religion, being a liberal religiously, being a Republican religiously, being a socialist religious. All of these things, these are systems of thought, economic theories, capitalism, socialism, that we can use and apply to things, but they're not systems to belong to. They're not isms, they're ologies. These are logical systems that we can use to solve problems, and we should not be creating a new religion from them, because that is where rigidity comes from. That's where disagreements and conflict come from. So let's see. Anova, thank you. Yes, people need to grow. They need to open their minds. I agree. And I think I don't like to blame people for these things. I think these are systemic issues. These are the results of technologies and the development of a really fast-paced information society that algorithms and media interests and incentives are driving people to have more closed minds. And so we're trying to reopen those minds by establishing these principles, framing conversations. That's why we're calling the the Reconstitution founders are framers. We want to frame conversations that are healthy, that lead to the opening of minds. Leonard, yes, we need higher order principles. We can agree on that. Will, in the longer term, will help reduce political divisions. I have heard the idea embodied by your 6 principles. It referred to as star manning other people's arguments. Thanks so much for all the excellent work. Thank you, Leonard. And I've heard actually titanium manning. One of our co-framers, Ryan, has a great article out there on titanium manning. Definitely look that up. It is a complexity version, is what I would call it, of steel manning. But I would love to hear more about star mannings, Leonard. So please feel free to send a link on that along. We only have about 2 minutes left, so any final questions before we drop? I'm glad we sort of ended on that note of the principles that I want to have in these conversations. We had some really good substantive questions earlier. Again, this first proposal that we have for the Reconstitution is the separation of money and politics, and what we mean by that is ending the entrenched influence of money on politics, which leads to disproportionate influence by people who have money on politics, which leads politics to make those people more money, and round and round we go. So this vicious cycle can be ended if we simply separate them in the same way that we separated church from state at the very outset of this country. We can do this again and end that vicious cycle of power accumulation in a very, very simple and elegant way. As I said, giving Congress the ability to regulate campaign finance, overturning Citizens United, not allowing folks who can't vote in an election to contribute to folks in that election, running for that election, and lastly, to deal with lobbying, the revolving door, and using political office for personal enrichment. Chris has one last comment. It looks like the last comment we have from all platforms, and I'll read it and then we'll drop. Chris, recommended constitutional requirements for those that run for office: trained and tested skill sets, diplomacy, communications, law, public service, how our government works. Great suggestion, Chris. It is something, actually, we have something called the Civil Service Commission. This was founded, I think, by President Chester Arthur sometime in the late 1800s. It was a way of making sure that our political officials were informed, knowledgeable, skilled about the way government works. Look into it. There's something sketchy going on there. That office has been empty of appointed officials for at least a decade, maybe more. I don't know why. It's something for a conversation for another day, but it is very interesting that in an age with a lack of expertise, accountability in office, that office goes unmanaged. So look that up, the Civil Service Commission. I think it may have been renamed at some point, but you can go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole on that one and learn a lot. So thank you all for joining. Yes, thank you, Anova. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate your time. We'll be back next Thursday at 8 p.m. to discuss deliberative democracy, having a seat at the table, citizen conventions, and all of that. You can read more about that on our website. Explainer video coming on that next Monday. Look out for it. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.